This is Luba, Upthink Coaching founder. We are a coaching and coach training company, and we often get asked by new coaches about various coaching niches and approaches. So we thought the best way to introduce all the various coaching niches would be to invite coaches, invite real practitioners to talk about niches that they are in. And today I'm very happy to introduce our guest, professional coach, Will Sung, who is an organizational coach, and we'll talk about organizational coaching today. Well, it's a pleasure to see you. Thanks for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself first?
Well, thank you, Luba. First of all, thank you for inviting me. I feel super privileged to be able to be interviewed by you to talk about our profession as professional coaches. So hello and welcome. My name is William Sung, and I'm from London, living here in Guangzhou in the mainland of China. I'm an accredited PCC ICF coach, and I've been coaching professionally since 2017, but coaching in a kind of work scenario since 2007, 2008, when I first inherited a team in my workplace. So I've been coaching for a number of years now. I work with a number of clients, small to large enterprises, but also with education as well, and coaching teams and individuals. And today I understand I'm going to be talking about organizational coaching, which is one of my favorite subjects.
That's great. What is organizational coaching? What does an organizational coach do?
So let's first take a step back and understand what an organization is. An organization is a collection or a collective of people who share a common purpose to achieve a mission for a company or organization. And that organization has multiple layers, and a small organization might be quite flat, such as a startup with 2 layers. And then it can go up to a massive enterprise between 15 and 20 layers. So then you'll have a pyramid of leaders or managers and employees or subordinates. And then along the horizontal, you have, as I said, startups, which are less mature. And then you have big organizations, big blue chips, which are very mature. So organizational coaching coaches across up and down and horizontally across small to large organizations. And it falls into a category of one-to-one coaching or team coaching or leadership coaching or executive coaching. So it's a very broad spectrum, and different organizations would ask for a different type of organizational coach or a leadership coach or an executive coach. So depending on the organization, it may mean different things to different people. So there isn't a kind of one size fits all. That would be my answer to what is organizational coaching, Luba.
Thank you. This is great to hear. There are lots of opportunities for coaches, and they can choose smaller niches within organizational coaching, but it also sounds a little bit intimidating, right? The area is so big. So what are some common requests that you personally work with as an organizational coach?
Great question. I think when I first started out, and then I guess this is in most coaching organizations, where they would ask to find a coach that's already in that industry. So when I first started out, I came from a banking background. So my first clients were always from banking, because that's where they feel that I resonated or I understood them more. And over time, different types of organizations or different types of companies or different industries would reach out to me. So when I first started out, it was more banking, and it was more one-to-one and leadership coaching and executive coaching. And as I went through my career in terms of organizational coaching, then it became more team coaching and smaller teams, especially here in this part of the world, where, because I'm of Asian descent or of Chinese descent, but also brought up in the West, I kind of fit their kind of growth strategy of kind of leaders wanting to move out of their comfort zones within the Chinese environment into more of a Western environment. So that's what I kind of started off with. And then more recently, my coachings are still executive, but more on a cultural level. So how do we instill culture into organization? How do we look at change and transformation? So helping not just the leadership team, but also the kind of working level team as well. So it all really depends on the client. But I positioned myself originally as an executive coach, and then it kind of naturally and organically kind of evolved. So I didn't plan to look at organizational coaching when I first started, but that's how it evolved.
Right. Well, we sometimes say that a niche may find you. If you
Mm.
don't know what niche you want to have, sometimes a niche finds you, and sounds like this is exactly what happened with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's just the journey of life. As you progress, you meet different people, and then as you coach more, you start to identify which areas you feel you're better at. Okay, so as an example, I felt that yes, whilst I enjoy executive coaching, it's quite one-to-one. It's very mission critical. It's very KPI driven. It's very objective. Whereas leadership coaching, I started to enjoy because that started to allow me to get involved with the teams a little bit more. And in team coaching is also very, very different as well, because you have so many different types of people who are moving towards the same goal. And then how do you kind of weave them together through coaching and seeing that flourish? So organizational coaching has so many aspects, and I think you can find your niche within organizational coaching if that's something you want to pursue.
Right. I'm curious if you've observed an evolution of coaching requests throughout your career. So maybe some 5 or 7 years ago, leaders were more interested in their work-life balance, or maybe personal efficiency or time management, and now they're more interested in global reach. Or I personally get a lot of coaching assignments around leadership presence or executive presence. So I'm wondering if you've observed a kind of this evolution of coaching topics throughout your career.
Yes, certainly have. I can resonate with some of those that you've just mentioned. So when I first started off, it was a lot of it was how to step up within an organization and be known. So they were transitioned into a new leadership role, and they needed to be able to obviously execute on their objectives, but also to be known in a wider in a wider domain within their organization. And that a lot of that was around related to their communication styles, their presence in person in meeting, or the way they sent emails, or how they communicated their strategy in a non-physical contact type of way. And then over time, a lot of it was how to build a global presence. So it wasn't just an executive presence, but it was a global executive presence. And that took it to the next level. So that meant having to fly around the world, having to meet people in person, then and understand how to present their ideas very clearly when first meeting. So that's kind of evolved a little bit. And I think during COVID, there was a lot of, and I guess you can relate to this, a lot of mindfulness, a lot of mental wellness. And that's when the culture piece started out, where I started to work with the HR directors to understand what does flexible working look like. And of course, there's lots of trust issues around how can we trust someone to work from home. And a lot of that was about how to let managers let go of that control, and how to be able to measure, but then how to be able to not be directive, but be a little bit more curious, inquisitive, and using questions to help people perform in their day-to-day. And then recently, I think a lot more around cultural coaching as an organization. So I work with a relatively big organization in Hong Kong, where the CEO's just come in, and he has a specific way of wanting the organization to be seen by the public, but also wanting them to go back to their roots and go back to their original culture of being a firm that looks at not just customer experience, but also technology. So what I'm seeing now is lots of leaders are coming in, they're more courageous in wanting to move to a next level of cultural development, or they want to pivot either back or to a new way of working. So change and transformation, as an example, is another cultural revolution of the digital age. So where do we go from old ways of working to new ways of working? What's the new normal? So these are trends that I've seen. So you get the executive, and then you get the cultural movement of how to put it, that they're not fads or fashion, but I think, you know, that executive presence will always be there. But having to have massive change in culture, I think, is something that leaders are starting to be a little bit more courageous on them. And I think that's the kind of the new wave.
That's very helpful. Thank you. I speak to newer coaches a lot as a coach trainer, and I know that a lot of them are hesitant about approaching organizations, even if they have a business background or a leadership background, because they're not sure they can deliver or what exactly they are expected to deliver. So I thought I could ask you about ROIs of organizational coaching. As a practitioner, how do you measure this? What do HR directors want to see? What do organizations want to see as deliverables of organizational coaching?
Yeah, so really, really good question, and probably one that's quite hard to answer in a very succinct way or very objective way, because every HR director is slightly different, every organization is slightly different. And what they really want to be able to see is track record. And for someone that's completely new, that track record may not be there. And I think that's one of the most difficult things that new coaches start off with is, well, I've never coached a big organization before. Why would they choose me over someone like Luba, as an example? So when you do go to these chemistry interviews or you submit your profile, yes, you may not have 20, 30 different clients that you've got a proven track record for, but what you can talk about is how you in your previous life understood this and worked through it as a personal experience, but also talk around strategies and approaches that you can use or we want to be able to adopt, because we all have to start somewhere. We always have one or two tools in a toolbox that we can start to talk about when you meet that HR director or you meet that sponsor to say, look, this is how I would want to do it. This is how I think it's been done before, and I can do it this way. But also use your coaching approach to ask the sponsor and the HR is, what do you think? What do you think works better? What do you think may work in your organization? And then start that conversation, because once you bring the HR director or that sponsor closer to what you think, or you get close to what they want, then that's a conversation that they're more likely to feel comfortable on. So maybe use some of that coaching technique that you've learned from Luba, from Upthink to just have that conversation with the sponsors as a coach. And if you are able to have some experience or one or two clients, then talk about those stories, talk about the positions those your coachees were in, talk about their successes, talk about some of the challenges that they had as well at the start, and go through that journey with them. So it brings it to life to say, hey, do you know what? I think you are the right coach for us when you start. And hopefully that's the way you can tap into an organization where maybe you don't feel so confident about.
Thank you. That sounds very encouraging. So all new coaches, just use Will's tips and you'll be fine. In terms of measuring the impact of coaching in organizations, is there anything that you can share on this topic?
Sure. Look, I think before I answer that, I think it's very important to understand that coaching is still relatively new as a concept in this part of the world, being Southeast Asia. In places like the US, in Europe and Australia, it's very common. So I've worked with organizations where they have a specific budget for coaching. I won't name the companies, but the other companies would just have coaching under training. So once you understand that coaching, there's a budget for coaching, this organization is super serious about coaching. Okay, so therefore they're going to be very precious about the KPI, how you measure the outcome of coaching. For the ones in training, there was always coaching as some form of training. Okay, and this is the maturity of learning and development in HR. So if you have an organization that has coaching as a separate budget, then those companies are more likely to be asking for executive or leadership coaching rather than team coaching. That's not a problem. I've gone into executive coaching, and the executive I've coached has asked for team coaching afterwards, or in synchronization with their coaching, because they're finding it quite useful, and then they would want team coaching as well. So if you do measure executive coaching, it's going to be around specific things such as P&L, okay, or project delivery, or change and transformation. So these measures are normally discussed at the sponsors meeting. So what normally happens in executive coaching for me is that I'd meet the sponsor and the individual. And during that 1 hour, we would get to a point of what do they want to be able to see that is different? And how would you measure that through milestones? And then, of course, we'll agree at a midway checkpoint, and towards the end, we'll have a wrap up. But there will normally be around budgetary, project, change and transformation. And in my latest case, it's culture. How do you measure culture? Okay, so they'll have to send out surveys and net promoter score. So organizational coaching outcomes can be quite fluffy. Okay, and that's the danger of whether you're a successful coach or unsuccessful coach, because sometimes you're coaching an organization where the outcome could be 2 years later, 3 years later. So you need to be very, very clear about this coaching agreement is for 9 months. This is specifically what we can measure and will measure. And then later on, this should happen. Okay. And then that accountability is with the individual or with the team. Okay. If it's not executive coaching, then again, the same process happens, but then you would want the individuals, the coachees, to be able to state their outcomes. As a coach, you would normally sit back and think about whether they're realistic in relation to the timeline. Are they realistic in relation to that person's motivation? So that person might say, yes, I really want to do everything. And then during that chemistry call with the sponsor, you might want to read it in a little bit, because you don't want to set your coachee up to fail, but you also don't want to be able to set yourself up to fail as their coach. So you need to find that middle ground, that right balance of, making sure the leash is loose and long, but not long enough where they're running off 10,000 miles away. But, you can always bring them back, and making sure that the sponsor is able to see the outcome of that measure as well. And that's very important, because if the sponsor who's paying for the coaching doesn't see it, then sometimes it could just be personal coaching. So you have an executive who has personal coaching, but the organization doesn't see the benefit. So there's no right or wrong answer. I'm not sure if I answered that very well, but it all depends on the type of organizational coaching, and also the appetite and motivation and the size of the goal that the coachee and the sponsor wants.
Great. I think what I've just heard is mostly around using exploration and discovery process to co-create those agreements and measures of success in a very similar way, like coaches do this with their personal individual clients, but maybe also taking into account the stakeholders and the sponsors' interests and what organization will actually see. Because I think what sometimes may happen is when a person feels the impact, but the organization does not see the impact as clearly as they see their personal transformation.
You've wrapped it up much better than the way I've explained it. And what I've just picked up from you, and it's very important to emphasize, is that when you're coaching someone individually and you're drawing up a contract, that person's growth is very individual. So when you're in an organization, remember that an organization has a business purpose, has a mission, it has a multiple layers of people. So if either one of those three things are not touched upon, then again, it's just very personal coaching. So make sure that you're using language when you're in that sponsorship call, that first call, to talk about, how would the organization feel this change that we're agreeing here? And you ask that question to the sponsor and to the coachee, and let them define what that would look like. And then you can manage that conversation.
Right. From what you've just shared, I think it proves my own words to coaches when I say, when you work with organizations, it is quite helpful to have some knowledge of systems, or systems thinking, some systemic coaching skills, just because you'll be able to see a wider system beyond the individual and their efforts. Are there any other areas of knowledge that a coach needs to have or dive into if they want to do organizational coaching?
Yeah, great question. I think for me, I keep in touch with systems thinking, systems coaching, from a practitioner's point of view, but at the same time, I also keep in touch with what's changing in the world. Okay, so if we think about organizations are going through change, AI is going to be a big disruptor of how we work, how we use tooling, etc. So understanding how the world is changing and in how an organization would react to that. So for instance, if you're working with a technology firm, how is new technology and how new ways of working with new technology going to change the way they engage with their customers? Okay, because that will be high in the minds of that organization. If you're working in, say, the health sector, you'd want to understand, okay, so what's disrupting the health sector? Okay, COVID has come out, vaccinations, but also, we're living longer. So depending on what the organization does, they may have a different way to react to the world. And understanding how the world works is super important as well. And then the last thing I kind of look at is what's HR saying? Okay, what skills are being adopted? So I subscribe to Udemy. So I've had a couple of certificates using Udemy, which is one of many platforms you can use. But I like Udemy because they have a nice report, which is digestible. And then looking at what trends there are in terms of how are people themselves upskilling themselves, what our HR directors are saying, and what's disrupting, what ways of working are disrupting what types of industry from a HR perspective. And remember that there's always this, industry standard, which kind of changes every year or every 2 years. So standards move. So don't feel that you've learned something and then that's going to be like that forever. It isn't, and it moves on. But also at the same time, think about which country you're operating in. Okay, so some countries may not be as developed yet in terms of their systems thinking, in terms of the technology adoption, in terms of their HR policies and practices. So notice that there isn't a one size fits all either. So sometimes you have to kind of not be so stubborn in way, this is the way it works out in the US, or this is how it works in Germany, or this is how it works in Hong Kong. So therefore it should work for you. Being able to be flexible in understanding that every organization it operates in a different mature environment, and in itself could be an immature organization as well, such as a startup. Taking my Fortune 500 hat and working with a startup, there's a lot of conflict. Okay, there needs to be compliance and regulation, but that doesn't happen on day one. It happens on day 10, as an example. So we need to be able to be flexible as a coach as well in the way that we think what's right and may not be right.
This is a great reminder for everyone. What is in your toolkit as an organizational coach?
For me, I think it's basics. I really think it's basics, which is to understand human psychology. Okay, just to understand that we're all humans, and as a behavioral coach, there's this 3 layers, which is there's me, there's you, and there's us. Okay, once I understand myself, I understand things in relation to me. Okay, so when I understand Luba, which is the you aspect, I understand Luba in relation to me, and that Luba also has things around her. So that's the me and the you level. And then when me and Luba are a part of a team, then that's the us. How do we work together? So understanding that we're all different, we all have different personalities and behavioral traits and maybe cultural and belief differences, then how do we come back down to that basic to understand of, okay, so I work in technology and I'm a startup, or I work in educational technology and I'm in a mid-level startup, or I work in a bank and it's been around for 150 years, but we're still people. And how do they relate to other people and that technology around them? And I think that's the crux of coaching, because as a coach, we cannot know every single industry. As a coach, we cannot know every single piece of technology and policies. But as a coach, we must understand human beings, the inner village, the landscapes that we operate in, and being able to listen and be empathetic and be compassionate about those things. And then taking a step back and then looking at the bigger picture and then coming back in. I think that's the biggest toolkit that I have, is being a coach. I know it's a bit of a cop-out answer, but being able to listen and be empathetic and then compassionate and then coming up with breath is probably my toolkit. Maybe it's the breaststroke, I'd call it.
Yeah. To me, this is one of the most fascinating things in coaching, to be able to work with different industries. And when I'm asked to show my track record of industries, you can see there everything from game development to pharma to manufacturing to education. And then they go like, And I go, I don't know what this list is going to tell you, because there are so many industries that can benefit from personality development, from teamwork development, from everything that coaching brings.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think when you start off with, working a niche, I think niche is a good thing. I think that means you're a specialist and you go deep. But I think as a coach, if you can coach across different industries, I think that's when you really show your mettle, because you don't have to be an expert in any particular industry, and it really shows that you're an expert of human dynamics and understanding how people think and feel and then how they behave within a society or a tribe. So I think when we talk about a niche, I think we should all start off with a niche, be known for something. I think if you want to be known as an organizational coach, I think maybe that could be later stage. So I'd say start off your niche as a leadership coach or an executive coach or a personal development coach within an organization, and then let that evolve. Because the more you see, the more you're likely to work with different organizations. Okay. So if I only worked in banking and I'm an organizational coach, people might just pigeonhole me and categorize me as a banking organizational coach. And the fact that you and I work across multiple industries, I think that says a lot for one, our ability to coach, but two, also the openness of other companies allowing you to come in, not being an expert of their field. I think that's also great recognition as well.
Lovely. So we'll be wrapping up soon, and I'd love to ask you if you have any tips for coaches who consider organizational coaching niche.
Sure. I would say start small. I would say organizational coaching, I'd say, falls into three categories. One is executive coaching, which is the executive or leadership teams, and they are ones that are focused on big projects, transformation, cultural, organizational, massive targets. And then there's team coaching, which is how do you help a person become a better team leader, or how do they help that person build teams? And then the third, which naturally is a progression, is team coaching, which is how do you help a team achieve a common mission? All three are similar but very, very different. But if you're able to do one of each, then you kind of have a rounded picture of how does the top mission affect team leaders' behavior, and then how does the team behave to or execute on that mission. So once you have the holy trinity of these three things, then I would say then start to pitch yourself as an organizational coach. And that's when you say, yeah, I've done executive, I've done leadership, and I've done teams. In fact, I've done more leadership than executive. So then you say, okay, I'm an organizational coach with more leadership and team coaching. But you can always position yourself as an organizational coach. But executive coaching is probably quite niche. Leadership coaching is very niche, and then team coaching is very niche. But if you put them all together, then I'd say that is a good platform to start calling yourself an organizational coach, and then using that to move on to the next customer.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights today, Will. I really enjoy listening to your practical experiences. I think you showed both the breadth and the depth of organizational coaching, and I realize it's a complex subject, but at the same time, you also showed how new coaches can start small and what little things they can try to step into organizational coaching if they wish to do so.
Yeah. And just on a very last tip is, if you don't get hired as an organizational coach, or in any case, always ask the person that's interviewing you for coaching, what is it that you would prefer that I had? Okay, so you always ask feedback questions if you don't get a contract, because you never know what you're missing unless you ask. So if they want an organizational coach, they say, oh, we wanted you to be able to coach more around this part of the organization. We wanted you to have experience coaching at this level. And then that goes, all right, that's where I need to get to. Okay, so always ask a question of, what is it that I'm missing? Are there approaches that you want me to prefer me to use? Because there's so many approaches in coaching, so many different methodologies. And maybe some people just want a specific way of coaching. So please do ask, and don't feel that just because you've been rejected once, you're going to be rejected forever. keep trying, because it's tough as an organizational coach or any coaching when you first start. But the tip is just to keep persevering and believe in yourself. And the more you coach, the more confident you'll be. And then those conversations that you have with your sponsor will become much, much easier.
Thank you. This is great to hear. Very, very encouraging. Thank you so much for this conversation again.
You're most welcome, Riva.